Story 1, The Cornfield Stalker. There's something about cornfields that messes with your mind, the way the stalks rustle in the breeze, the shadows twisting unnaturally under the moonlight. But that night, it wasn't the wind that disturbed the field. It was something far worse. My friends Rod, James, Bud, and I had heard about the local haunted house attraction for years. It was infamous around here, only opening during October, sitting ominously at the edge of town like a forgotten relic. Everyone swore by its horror. The attraction included the usual stuff: a haunted house, a corn maze, and a haunted trail that ran through the woods. Simple enough. We figured it'd be fun, some cheap scares and good laughs, especially with Bud, who laughed at everything. When we pulled into the dirt parking lot, the air around us felt thick, almost suffocating, with a creeping chill that wormed its way under your skin. Rod made a joke about the place being run by serial killers, and we laughed it off. But there was something off about that night. It was too quiet. You'd expect to hear other visitors, but there was only the wind and the occasional shuffle from the field nearby. We started with the haunted house, which was decent creaky floorboards, people jumping out in tattered costumes. Fun, but nothing to scream about. Toward we made our way to the corn maze, thinking it would be the highlight of the night. That's when everything started to go wrong. The corn maze was much bigger than we expected, with tall stalks swaying unnervingly, their shadows stretching in strange, unnatural shapes across the narrow paths. It felt like something was watching us. At first, we were all joking around, calling out directions, but that easy feeling began to slip away the deeper we went. First scare was subtle, a rustling sound behind us, followed by what we thought was a scarecrow lunging from the corn. He was grotesque, with a distorted burlap face and ragged clothes, chasing us down a twisted path. I'll admit, we screamed and ran, hearts pounding in our throats, but once we lost him, the adrenaline buzzed into laughter. Damn, that guy's good, Rod shouted, hands on his knees, gasping for air. But that laughter died quickly. I don't know when exactly it happened, but I lost the others. One moment we were together, and the next they were gone, swallowed by the maze. Called out their names, my voice trembling as I pushed deeper into the rows of corn, hoping they'd answer back. Nothing, just the eerie whisper of the wind through the stalks. Then came the footsteps, heavy, deliberate. At first, I thought it was one of my friends trying to scare me, but the steps didn't falter. They were closing in, methodical. Turning a corner, I froze. A man stood just ahead, half hidden by the shadows, wearing a black winter coat and a blank black mask. It wasn't part of the attraction. I knew that right away. This was something else, something wrong. He didn't move at first, just stood there, watching me. Then, without a word, he charged. I bolted, crashing through the corn, my lungs burning. I screamed back that I'd report him, that it wasn't funny anymore. He didn't care. I could hear him gaining on me, closer and closer, until I finally broke through the maze's edge and found an employee near the entrance. Gasping for breath, I told him what happened, describing the man in the black coat. But the employee's face paled. He said they didn't have anyone wearing that costume. I felt my blood run cold, but before I could say anything, my phone buzzed a missed call from James. When I called him back, he sounded annoyed. "Where the hell are you? We gave up looking for you and went to the haunted trail." The haunted trail? They had just left me. Determined not to get separated again, I marched toward the woods, ready to rejoin them. The trail was dimly lit by hanging lanterns, casting long, skeletal shadows that made everything look distorted and wrong. I pushed forward, my breath fogging in the cold air, my shoes crunching on the gravel path. The sound of Halloween music playing from the distant speakers barely registered, as I scanned the trees, looking for any sign of my friends. But then, standing in the middle of the trail, blocking my way, was the man in the black mask. This time, he didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward me, his feet pounding the dirt as I spun and tore off the path into the woods. Branches whipped my face, my feet tangled in roots, but I didn't stop. I could hear his ragged breath behind me, feel the weight of his presence closing in. I screamed into the trees, hoping someone would hear me. No one did. I crashed through the undergrowth, running blindly, until I didn't hear him anymore. The silence was worse. I dropped to the ground, back against a tree, gulping down cold air, too scared to move. Suddenly, my phone rang again, echoing through the forest like a death knell. The sound startled me so badly I nearly dropped it. I silenced it immediately, holding my breath. Listening, the footsteps had stopped. I peeked around the trees, scanning the woods, but saw nothing. Maybe he'd given up. Maybe he'd moved on to scare someone else. I slowly stood, heart pounding, and that's when I saw him standing no more than 10 feet away, watching me from behind a tree. His mask glinted in the dim light, a blank, expressionless void. I didn't wait for him to move. I ran again, ignoring the burning in my legs, crashing through the woods. I reached the edge of the trail, thinking I was safe, but just as I thought I'd made it, he tackled me to the ground. His hands were cold, his grip like iron as he shoved me down into the dirt. I fought, kicking and screaming, but he was stronger. Then, as suddenly as he'd attacked, he let me go. I scrambled to my feet, looking back to see him standing there staring, but this time, he didn't follow. Just stood at the edge of the path, watching as I ran toward the entrance. I stumbled into the employee's shack, breathless and terrified, demanding to speak to the manager. When I told him about the man, his face went pale. He called the police, saying that no actor should have been wearing that outfit. My friends met up with me shortly after, all of them looking confused and apologetic. The cops showed up, but they never found the guy. The attraction closed early that night, and I haven't been back since. I don't think I'll ever go back, because every night, I still hear those footsteps in my dreams, the heavy, relentless thudding of boots on dirt, chasing me deeper into the cornfield where no one can hear me scream. Story 2, The Woman in the Window the year I turned 13. Halloween night wasn't just about candy or costumes anymore, it was the night everything changed. My friend Chris had invited me and a couple of our buddies to stay at his place. His house was big, the kind of old, creaky mansion you only see in horror movies. Isolated, too, just on the outskirts of town, tucked away by a thicket of trees that made it feel miles away from the nearest neighbor. It was the perfect place to go trick-or-treating, we thought. No busy streets and all the spooky ambience you could ask for. It was me, Chris, Josh, and Ben that night, dressed up in our ridiculous costumes, holding plastic bags that were filling up fast with candy. We were nearing the end of our trick-or-treating route when we hit a house that made us stop dead in our tracks. It was different from the others, not because it was decorated, but because it wasn't. No pumpkins, no cobwebs, no lights, just dark windows and a front porch that sagged like it was exhausted from holding the place up. Still, Chris insisted we give it a try. We were kids, and kids will do anything for more candy. The door creaked open before we even knocked, and a woman stood there. She was tall, gaunt, with stringy, shoulder-length hair that looked like it hadn't been washed in weeks. Her face was pale, drawn tight over her skull, with sunken eyes that seemed to pierce right through us. I could smell the stench of cigarettes and something else, something rotting, wafting from inside the house. "Sorry, boys, no candy left," she rasped, her voice crackling like dry leaves. "But I'll see if I can find something." We waited on the porch, exchanging uneasy glances as she shuffled back inside. Minutes passed, long enough for us to start wondering if she'd forgotten about us. But then she returned, holding a crumpled brown paper bag. "There you go," she said, shoving the bag toward us. Candy inside looked old, like it had been sitting there for years. The wrappers were yellowed, some with strange stains. The smell of something sour drifted up from the bag. I wrinkled my nose and started to back away. "Thanks, but we really should get going," I stammered. The others mumbled quick excuses too. But before we could leave, she reached out, her bony fingers wrapping around Josh's arm. "Please, take it," she whispered, her grip tightening. Josh jerked away, and the woman quickly slammed the door shut without another word. We ran. Didn't even think about it, we just bolted from the porch, laughing nervously, trying to shake off the strange encounter. But as we moved on to the next house, something gnawed at the back of my mind. Something about the way her eyes had locked onto us, like she knew us, like she was waiting. When we finished our trick-or-treating, Chris's mom picked us up. We piled into the car, still jittery from the scare. But soon our conversation turned back to candy and plans for the night. It wasn't until we reached Chris's driveway that things got truly terrifying. As we got out of the car, we saw her, the woman from the house, standing at the end of the street. Her eyes locked onto us. She was walking slowly, methodically in our direction. Her face was pale under the street lights, and her hands hung limp at her sides. But it wasn't just her presence that unnerved us. It was the way she moved. like her feet barely touched the ground, like she was gliding. We hurried inside, locking the doors behind us. Chris's mom asked what was wrong, but we just brushed it off, wanting to seem like scared little kids. We chalked it up to Halloween nerves, tried to forget about her, and settled in for a night of horror movies. But then, as the night dragged on and the clock ticked past midnight, something far worse happened. We were sprawled out in Chris's room, lights off, watching The Exorcist when I noticed it. A faint glow under the door, light turning on in the hallway. We all froze, expecting Chris's parents to come barging in to tell us to go to bed. But no one entered the room. The light just stayed on, casting an eerie strip of brightness across the floor. "Should we check it out?" Josh whispered. I didn't want to, but we were too curious. I got up, slowly cracked open the door, and peeked down the hall. Nothing. The hallway was empty. My heart was pounding in my ears as I motioned for the others to join me. Creeping out into the hallway, we moved toward the source of the light, Chris's parents' bedroom. The door was wide open, but there was no one inside. Just the faint rustling of the wind outside whizzing through the cracked window. "I don't like this," Ben muttered, glancing nervously around. "Let's just go back to the room." I nodded, ready to turn back when Chris gasped, his face going white as a sheet. "It's her." Through the large window at the end of the hallway, we saw her, the woman. She was standing outside in the backyard, staring up at us. Her hollow eyes bored into us, and as soon as she saw us looking, she bolted. We ran back into Chris's room and locked the door. Our hearts were racing, the fear tangible now as we huddled together. "How did she find us?" Josh whispered, his voice trembling. The night dragged on painfully, each creak of the house sending chills up our spines. But we somehow managed to fall asleep, huddled together in a pile of sleeping bags. The next morning, Chris's mom looked as pale as we felt. "I had the worst nightmare last night," she said, rubbing her temples. "I swear I saw someone standing over my bed." We didn't tell her what we'd seen, didn't dare mention the woman in the window. But the image stayed with me. I knew she hadn't been dreaming. And to this day, I still wonder what if that woman hadn't been standing outside. What if, at some point during the night, she had made her way inside the house? Story 3. The Lonely Trick-or-Treater. It was Halloween, but it didn't feel like it. The air outside had an eerie stillness, like the world had taken a deep breath and was holding it in. Was home alone, my dad working late, my mom staying with her sister. My sister had left for college weeks before, leaving me to handle the trick-or-treaters. I never liked being the one left to pass out candy. Our house wasn't in the best part of town, and the nights seemed to stretch on forever, the shadows growing longer and darker as the hours ticked by. My dad had made it a point to buy bags of Kit Kats, his favorite, and left strict instructions to empty the bowl before midnight. By the time the last wave of kids came through, it was after 9 and the street had grown quiet. I was halfway through a stack of homework when the doorbell rang again. It was strange because it had been silent for over an hour. Still, I grabbed the nearly empty bowl and opened the door, expecting a group of late-night trick-or-treaters. Instead, I was met with a single man, maybe in his mid-30s, standing under the porch light. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Trick or treat," he said, in a voice too calm for the occasion. I stood there, frozen, unsure of what to do. He wasn't in costume. Just a man, too old to be trick-or-treating, standing on my porch. I didn't say anything. I just held the bowl out, hoping he'd take a Kit Kat and leave. Instead, he reached for the storm door, fingers closing around the handle. I panicked, slamming the door shut before he could come any closer, locking it tight. My heart was racing, my fingers trembling as I texted my dad, telling him some creepy guy was at the door. My dad's response: "If he tries anything again, go outside and handle it." Not exactly the reassurance I needed. Went back to my room, but I couldn't focus. Something about the man's smile, it wasn't right. He didn't look like someone trick-or-treating for fun. He looked like someone who had found what he was searching for. And then the power went out. It wasn't storming. There was no whine, just darkness, pure, suffocating darkness. That's when I heard the creak of floorboards upstairs. At first, I thought it was my mind playing tricks, the residual fear from the man at the door. But no, it was real. Someone was moving through my house. I texted my family, told them someone was inside. My mom begged me to call the cops, but I didn't. I couldn't. I was frozen. The footsteps were getting louder, closer. I ran to the basement. as I felt remotely safe huddling in the dark, waiting. The creaking above me was slow and deliberate, like someone was searching for something for me. Then the basement door opened, a sliver of light poured. Story for the midnight intruder last Halloween. The night felt like it had teeth. It was a Wednesday, a school night, and I was home alone. Dad was working the night shift. My mom had gone to stay with her sister because they'd been fighting again. My sister was off at college, so I was the last one left in the house, stuck handing out candy to trick-or-treaters, as if that was supposed to keep me occupied. Dad had been weirdly insistent about me giving out all the candy. He had bought 2 huge bags of Kit Kats, and I remember him telling me to make sure they were gone by the end of the night, like it was some kind of mission. He took Halloween seriously. For some reason, I didn't get home from class until after 6, and by then the street was already flooded with kids. I barely had time to drop my bag on the couch before the doorbell started ringing, and it kept ringing. First couple hours went by in a blur of costumes, laughter, and candy wrappers until, gradually, the night began to quiet down. By 9 o'clock, the street was empty, save for the occasional porch light flickering in the distance. Figured I was done for the night, so I locked the front door, grabbed my laptop, and headed upstairs to finish my homework. That's when the doorbell rang again. I hesitated. It was too late for trick-or-treaters, especially in our neighborhood. I grabbed the candy bowl, now nearly empty, and went downstairs, expecting a couple of teenagers trying to score some last-minute sweets. But when I opened the door, it wasn't kids standing there. It was a man. He was maybe in his mid-30s, dressed in a plain hoodie and jeans, no costume, just standing there under the dim porch light with a blank expression on his face. He waved awkwardly, like he wasn't sure what to do with his hands. "Trick or treat," he said, his voice flat. I stared at him, not knowing how to respond. Something about him just didn't feel right. He didn't have a bag for candy, didn't even bother pretending to be in costume. He was just standing there, smiling in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "Sorry, we're out of candy," I lied, starting to close the door. Before I could shut it, his hand shot out and grabbed the handle of the storm door. My breath caught in my throat as he slowly pulled it open. I slammed the door in his face, heart pounding, and locked it. I texted my dad right away, telling him what had happened. His response was something like, "If he comes back, go outside and handle it. Teach him a lesson." Easy for him to say. For the next hour, I tried to shake it off. I locked every door, double-checked every window, but the unease clung to me like a second skin. Went upstairs, shut the door to my room, and threw myself into homework, trying to distract myself, but I couldn't focus. I kept glancing at the window, half expecting to see him standing there staring in, and then power went out. At first, I thought it was a neighborhood-wide thing, maybe a transformer blew or something, but then the floorboards creaked above me. My room was on the 2nd floor. I froze, phone in hand, the screen casting an eerie glow in the darkness. Someone was inside the house. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, moving through the hallway above the living room. Toward the staircase, I texted my family group chat. My mom immediately told me to call the police, but I didn't. My hands were shaking too much to dial, and deep down, I didn't want to make a noise. The footsteps came closer. Each creak of the floorboards made my pulse race faster. Whoever it was, they were coming down the stairs. I grabbed the first thing I could find, a baseball bat, and bolted into the basement. My dad always said the basement was the safest place in the house. No windows, only one door. I barricaded myself in and listened, my ears straining for every sound. Then the basement door creaked open. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to control my breathing, trying to stay quiet, hoping, praying that they wouldn't come down the stairs. But then I heard footsteps descending slowly, each one heavier than the last. My heart was pounding in my throat. I gripped the bat tighter, eyes locked on the shadows stretching across the basement floor. They reached the last step and stopped. Silence. I didn't dare move. Then a voice, low, grating. "I can see you." The words sent a jolt of terror through my veins. I bit my lip, trying to keep from making a sound. I could hear him breathing, just standing there at the bottom of the stairs, waiting. Minutes felt like hours. My mind raced through every terrible scenario, every way this could end. I was sure I was going to die. Then suddenly there was a loud bang from the front of the house. The man jerked, startled by the noise. I heard him bolt back up the stairs, his footsteps pounding above me until everything went silent. I waited, counted to 60 in my head. Then I heard the front door slam shut. I scrambled upstairs, rushing to the door. Just as the cops were arriving, I flung the door open, breathless, pointing to where the man had gone. But by the time the officers searched the house, he was gone, vanished into the night. The police said I'd been lucky. My luck didn't last long, though. I realized later that I had left the back door unlocked that night, making it easy for him to slip in unnoticed. As for the power, he tampered with the electric box outside, cut the lines just enough to kill the lights. They never found him. Don't know if it was the same man from the porch or someone else entirely. But that night, I learned that monsters aren't just in the stories, they're real, and sometimes they come knocking on your door.